As I said, my name is Andrew Pepper. I'm a partner at Resolve. I run the turnaround and restructuring team. I deal with all the issues around having a solvent business. I look at insolvency, but I try and avoid that. I try and save businesses prior to them failing. So I try and look at businesses 3 to 12 months before a failure. And I look at stressed businesses rather than distressed businesses. One of the big areas I find then when looking at stress businesses is a board. Now, when I do anecdotal evidence, I talk to various people and they will say, what causes a failure of a board? What causes the failure of a company? And sometimes we can say revenue, inflation, costs, supply demand issues. But over a number of years as a senior partner, I have to conclude that it's down to the people who run the business, the management team, the board, the stewardship. And I think that's really, really important to understand because I've seen so many businesses where the business just needs a balanced board, a leadership board that can take them through a problem. I can sometimes advise on a board, but if I'm not the director, how do I get my hands dirty? How does the board get its hands dirty, gets hold of the problem and drives it through to a solution? Now, if you haven't got a balanced board, a functioning board, an efficient board, you're in trouble because you could have the greatest turnaround plan ever. But when the advisors sit around the board and look at each other and say, great, we've done a £50,000 piece of work, and the board is then asked, who's going to deliver it? Well, unless you've got a CRO, you look to the board and the board goes, maybe it's us. And then you look at the board and go, maybe they can't do it. And how do we get a balanced board? So therefore you interject some form of NED or some help. So this has been a part of my life for the last 25 years. Two of my good friends, Beatrice and Masoud, we were chatting about this over a meal, and we decided that the best way to do this would be to expand on this and say, how can we use our experiences in a webinar to show off what have we learned, how can we avoid that problem, and what solutions can we offer? So this is going to be a very practical way of looking at things. I'll ask Beatrice and then Masoud to actually introduce themselves, but just from a quick point of view of myself, Beatrice I've known for many years, a very senior lady, woman in the retail world, has done lots of work, very large businesses. I met her, a number of years ago. And Masoud, more of an international guy, looking at telecoms, but also now a professor at Leeds University. So what I've tried to do is bring in some very commercial aspects, but also some academic aspects, combine the two, so therefore we can deliver you a very practical and smart and academic approach. But you'll have things at the end of this webinar to take home and say, I've learned A, B, and C, plus I know how to implement A, B, and C, because these guys not only talk about it on a piece of paper, they do it as well. And that's really, really important. So first of all, if I hand over to Beatrice, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation. So yes, and I don't remember how long we've known each other. I'm not sure my memory goes back that far. I'm a retailer, as Andrew mentioned. I've been in retail over 40 years. I have worked both in the UK, across Europe, and the USA. In my 40 years in retail, I spent about 20 years as MD and CEO. And I think over the years, I have become known for my turnaround expertise, which I think how Andrew and I probably crossed paths all these years ago. As a CEO, just to give you an idea, I was involved in the recovery and the sale of TJ Hughes back in 2012, the recovery and sale of the Etam Group in the Netherlands. I also did the recovery of the Claire's Group, a large American company, but trading in 49 countries. And then more recently, I did the turnaround of Condor, a UK business, and then Pinky, a fashion business in France. I retired in 2016 as an executive, and then for the last 8 years, I've been working as a non-exec or a chair. But my turnaround expertise is kind of keeping with me, where I often end up in stressed or distressed situation, helping executive teams recover the business or make the business stronger. So as an NED, to give an example, I was involved with the sale of Solent a few years ago, the sale of TM Lewin during COVID, the restructuring of Pizza Express. And then right now, I'm on the board of 6 different companies, 3 in the UK and 3 overseas, and 2 of which we are currently in the process of selling. So I know a thing or two about boards, and many as a CEO I have not enjoyed working with, and that has given me a lot of insights onto how I can be hopefully a better NED for my executive teams.
Perfect. Beatrice, thank you very much. Masoud.
Well, I've had nearly the same amount of experience from a year's point of view as Beatrice. Beatrice and I actually worked together in the Arcadia group. I'm not going to say when, but that's when we became friends. I have been in banking, retail, fashion, also others, manufacturing, energy business, but primarily in telecoms and FMCG, with experience of startups, experience of owning my own retail shops, and running shopping centers, for a variety of different businesses. But some of the brands that you would know, most recently, I've been a director in EE for a year, helping them with the transformation within the new brand and the new internal meaning of that brand. I've been a director of an IoT company, and really helping businesses like that with transformation. Primarily, my main experience was as executive vice president for a Coca-Cola bottler, the anchor bottler, with 17 country operations, and 13 years with Vodafone, Arcadia, Pizza Hut, Nationwide Building Society, and others. Also working with family businesses, helping them with their succession, helping them with sustainability, generational change, as well as helping with fast-growing businesses, make sure that they have the right organization and people capability. Although Beatrice and I, and Andrew, we can all talk about turnaround, and I've been involved in a lot of turnarounds, luckily successful ones, in telecoms and in FMCG. My main focus now is on leadership and on organizational transformation and the readiness of the companies for the next challenges that are coming. And this is what I teach at Leeds University, to ensure that the future leaders have the right capability for what's coming.
Thank you, Masoud. We'll take questions at the end, so just pop them on the Q&A, and therefore we'll do that. I'm hoping to finish the webinar by 10 o'clock. We'll probably do 9 to 9:45 of us three talking and being hopefully very practical. And at the end, when we've got time, we'll ask a few questions and try to kind of unpick a few things. When Masoud and Beatrice and I were chatting, we were talking about how do we make this conversation practical. And we went back, I like films, so does Masoud, and we were chatting about the fact that if you had the right succession, the right board, you wouldn't necessarily have Russell Crowe in The Gladiator being unpicked. He could have been the emperor, whereas Joaquin Phoenix would have not been the emperor. So therefore, a lot of things around being succession planning relate to a bit of luck, a bit of forethought, and ultimately, if you can't get that, what can you do? So sometimes we have these people called non-executive directors. Maybe it's a family business, and ultimately, a family business needs to have an external party to assist them. So we often talk about non-executive directors, and I think that both of my colleagues here have been non-executive directors. But Beatrice, what is the purpose of a non-exec director?
Okay. Well, the role of a non-executive, as the name suggests, is a supervisory role, non-executive role. And, there lies the challenge on how you can influence the business and the teams without being in the business and without having those executive responsibilities. So your ability to influence others and situation is one of the key characteristics of the role. So I think there are different aspects of the role of the non-exec. The first one I'm going to say is to work with the executive to develop the strategic framework for the company and ensure the right resources are in place to deliver those strategic goals. The second one, if you are a non-exec, clearly is to support the chair and the CEO of the company. Your third role is to oversee the good running of the company, be it from a governance point of view, a reputation point of view, a regulatory point of view, or from a risk management point of view. I think as a non-exec, you are part of the team and you need to be mindful of the reputation of the company. So therefore, you have a key focus on the financial position on the company and on the reporting tools that the company uses so that you can actually know or try to know what is going on, either about what is being reported or by the question and the answers that can take place around the board table.
So Beatrice, non-execs do not take over. They are a support mechanism. So therefore, a board should be not afraid of having a non-exec. They should actually use a non-exec to assist them, but it's not a person coming in to take over.
No, I mean, occasionally you might be appointed in a chair as an executive chair, but usually those roles are non-exec. And that's very important because it should be truly a sounding board for the CEO and his team to use the expertise, use the experience, to have the advice on tap. But at the end of the day, I'm certainly very respectful that the CEO is in charge. The CEO is the one with executive roles. I think one other key role that we have as non-executives is to ensure the company remains focused on the future. It's very easy when you are, in the throes of it, especially if the business is facing, some serious challenges, that you forget to think about tomorrow. So, Masoud talks about transformation, and I know you do a lot of work in that area from a people point of view, but clearly technology is another big part, or ECG now, a lot of companies still today in 2014 have not really gone onto that journey. So as a non-exec, a lot of your job is to remind people of the other important topics that will make the company valuable over time in terms of attracting talent, but potentially investors.
But selection is key, isn't it? Trying to find the right person, the right mix, the right temperament. Can you give some examples of when it's gone wrong? Have you seen where they've got the wrong board member?
Yes, dare I say it. I mean, just to put it very frankly, as I mentioned, I was CEO for about 20 years. And in that period, I was working with the board every time. And only once in my career have I worked with a chair that I actually respected and got value from, which, is a terrible thing to say. And usually the problem is that, the board members might be too dated in their thinking, might be too old in terms of their approach to the market, and might not have continued to learn. I find even now a lot of my colleagues might not be very au fait with AI, or I mentioned ECG, earlier on as an example. So a lot of boards are absolutely of the wrong makeup. Some might not have an understanding of their customer target. I mean, I had that example in one of my boards many, many years ago, where although my board were all very lovely people, they were all old men that had not been at the coal face for at least 20 years. And my target customer was age 8. They had no understanding of what we as a team were talking about. I had another example where, I had a board who did not believe in e-commerce. And, that was only 10 years ago. It's not necessary. No, we don't need it. It's going, not important to us. So the makeup of the board, and I'm just talking here about skills, experience, understanding of the market, but I think also the culture mix, the diversity is also really important. So having a good alignment with your target audience, your customer, is very important, and having different views. You don't want a board where everyone thinks the same. Group thing is a very, very dangerous thing. So I like boards that are very diverse, so you can have real discussion, real disagreements, therefore proper conversation. And then, as a team, once we agree that's the way we go, then we align. But you do want the richness of the debate.
And that support is the way you can deliver a strategy, because those outliers, sometimes they get it wrong and you just go there, but sometimes they get it and you go, wow. And because of big data or historic data is you look at the things in the only one way, you need that person who's slightly crazy and says, no, let's look at it in a different way. So therefore, the mix of your board is vital.
Absolutely, absolutely vital. And, I mentioned the experience, but I think also culture mix, gender mix. You know, I've always worked in international companies, and very often the board was all British or all French or, you know, all Americans, when the company actually traded in many, many countries across the world. And that also was not right, because you miss the nuances of the different markets, different customer groups, and of your own teams, of course, because, you know, at one level, you do help provide the direction for the business, and you need to, to be inspiring and motivational for the executive teams.
So Masoud, what are the other reasons why NEDs don't deliver? Because Beatrice is talking about some of those delivery issues, but you've been there and you've had to sometimes, when you've looked at some of the Vodafones or some of the larger telecoms, where you had to go in and say, why have they not delivered, or why may they not deliver? So just give us a bit of clarity on those points, please.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I totally back everything that's been said so far. But by the way, just to put my academic bit in, there is studies by Bain and McKinsey that demonstrate what Beatrice just said, that the EBITDA and the value of the businesses that have diverse boards is significantly different to companies that are not. Look, when you go into these businesses, and even recently, you know, in a telecom business that I was involved in helping set up the non-execs, you find that the focus of the executive team on the operation, on the day-to-day, and we've all been operational directors, P&L accountable. We know what that's like. Things hit you, you deal with it day by day, and you've got too much to do, and that just takes over. What you don't then have is enough time to put on future focus on high value thinking about what challenges are coming down the road. And in almost all instances, Andrew, I find that organizations are behind the curve in seeing what's coming and preparing for it. So as an example, one of the first questions I always ask is, okay, you have a strategy. Yep. They all have a strategy document. Based on that strategy that you have agreed, which is what was politically expedient to the board to agree and the shareholders to sign off, with assumptions that you could challenge one way or another. Okay, have you got any idea what kind of organization you're going to need, what kind of talent you're going to need, what kind of capability you're going to need? I'll give you a very simple example. One of the massive telecom businesses I was very recently advising has a shift from telecom to techco, from techco to being a platform. Okay, so what does that take? That takes ability to partner properly. That takes ability to really work with industries outside of telecom. Okay, do you have that capability? No. Okay, how are you getting that capability? Are you buying it? Are you growing it? Are you renting it in? How are you doing it? And this lack of preparedness has always shocked me. When you say, why are we continuously...
So Masoud, let me just stop you there. So you are shocked by international, global, X-billion value businesses
and UK.
Not being prepared, and UK. So this is not, so going back to my earlier question, this is not about small little businesses little family business who's got an autocratic grandfather. These are large international PLCs, and you are a person who's gone in and looked at these businesses and you go, oh my God.
Yes, oh my God is normally first day. By the second day, it's a bit more sort of colorful language.
Yeah.
But look, it's like this. Every year we hear about massive organizational downsizing, right sizing, whatever. And I say, hang on a minute. If you knew how your business is growing, how the shape of your business is changing, how have you prepared for finding the right talent at the time when that talent is available and bringing it and keeping it? How have you used any vacancy as an opportunity to shift the organization towards where you want it to be? It doesn't happen. You let the line managers replace like for like, replace the old fashioned with the old fashioned. Because again, let's look at the board composition. Often those board compositions, NEDs, are ex-executives. Beatrice touched on that. What do they have? They have history, but it's more of the same. You're not bringing new people with new perspective in that fit your future challenge. The fundamental message of this from me is the lack of future preparedness and too much focus on the present and the past. And the board
so there's a lack of
composition.
clarity. So what I think you're saying is that
Yeah.
you're often brought in by a board who's confused.
Yeah.
And therefore you can look quite quickly at them and say, yes, you are confused because of the lack of clarity. You're not even sure why you've brought me in. And therefore they're saying, over to you, Masoud. And you go, well,
Yeah.
I can analyze this mess into 15 silos, each of which will have a solution. And you're absolutely amazed sometimes that they haven't seen that before, because
Let me give you
old thinking versus new thinking.
Let me give you a positive example. A couple of years ago now, a family-owned business was shocked by the fact that the older brother unfortunately passed away and there was no succession and everybody didn't know what to do. And there was 4 brothers running 23 different businesses. And these people, none of their children had been involved. Those shareholders, 25 shareholders, were not involved in the operation of the business. And really to take stock in a shock where nobody had thought about the fact that the people running the operation were 83 years old, 87 years old, and the youngest one, 77-year-old, brought me in and said, how do we create something that is sustainable and still growing? That's it, sustainable and growing. And really thinking ahead about, okay, how do you create the right governance? How do you create the right engagement of the executives who are running these businesses? Which businesses you're going to close? Which businesses you're going to grow? Which businesses need a turnaround? How are you going to manage that transformation?
So Masoud, it's down to execution then. So therefore you can look at all these things, and I'm just trying to give some bullet points for people who are following us. So therefore, once the gaps have been identified by you, it's then execution. And Beatrice touched upon it before. Do you rent in? Do you grow? Do you build? But again, it's not just finding the issue. When we're looking at boards, you've got to drive them to fill the gaps in. Otherwise, just doing a 50 grand piece of work isn't good enough. It just sits in the drawer. Someone's paid £50,000, but actually your business doesn't move forward.
No, nor is bringing in more red tape and more meetings and more templates to fill, whatever. It has to be very much focused on the future requirements. So the key question to ask the shareholders is, do you care about the brand? Do you care? What's your vision for this organization? How involved for example, a family business, how involved do they want to be? What would be their role in that involvement? And all of that, and then setting it up in a way that is continuous and sustainable, that ensures continuity, ensures risk reduction, so that you don't get caught short again the way that they were. You have to learn from those mistakes. And what I find is even big companies are not learning from those mistakes. We are continuously reenacting the same problems and not getting prepared for future challenges.
So these business needs we've just discussed, and the critical one you just about to kind of spoke about was the fact that what happens if it goes wrong? What happens if you are an emergency? Because ultimately your balance board works, then someone unfortunately dies, moves on, etc. And then suddenly you find your theoretically balanced board becomes very unbalanced. So then sometimes dropping in someone as an NED is very, very important. Let's move on to business type, because we've talked about what's an NED, why it happens, what they can add value. But to me, sometimes the style of the NED is basically it's important to see what style of NED goes with what style of business type. Now, clearly, we've all worked with normal commercial organizations. We've also worked for not-for-profit organizations, charities, charitable associations. And to me, I don't see there's necessarily a difference, because whether the company is making profit or making a surplus to put back into the beneficiaries, people should be efficient. People should drive. I was dealing with a very large charity recently where a lot of the board had to go because they just weren't the correct people for the current situation. And I think that's when we talk about NEDs, it's the correct person to the current situation or the correct person for the future situation. You might have got the correct person for the old situation, but by implication, it's old, it's past, it's gone. So therefore, we have to help people get now and the future. So let's talk about business size, the complexities of businesses. So if small, medium, and large, do you see a difference, Beatrice, in small, medium, large businesses, which then when you're asked to actually help with them?
Yes, absolutely. I think the differences are, you touched on it, the style in which you might operate, where you need to start in terms of the issues. But the quality of the board, the importance of the board for me is similar, whatever the country, in fact, the territory or the size of company. But, you know, I work often with, you know, family businesses, like as, you know, Masoud has described. And there you're a lot more involved in, call it the family dimension, i.e. what do you want as a person, as a family, you know, what is your vision for the business over time, what is the role of the company in terms of the family and the total wealth of that particular family. And often you have to have the discussion first before you can actually talk about the business, which clearly is not a discussion that takes place, you know, in a PLC environment, where it's kind of business right from the beginning. I think what is common for me is that usually people are not clear about what their challenges are, or what they think the situation is not actually what the situation really is. And I think as a non-exec, the fact that you're not in the business, you're not there all the time, allows you to have that external perspective that sometimes helps the executive see that actually you thought your problem was this one, but actually have a look at here or there.
So when we break it down, I think just to help the audience, small, big and medium businesses. So what do you see the positives and negatives on the small businesses? Because that's quite, not necessarily on this call, but we've all touched upon smaller businesses. What do you see as the big issues there?
Well, usually small means less level of affordability, less external talent. Therefore, the bandwidth of the existing team is going to be more restricted than in a larger company. So that would be kind of the main change. And therefore, your role is more multifaceted. You know, when I work with a small company, I'm going to say, I've got to, you know, have a finger in every pie kind of idea. Whereas when I am a non-exec on a billion, you know, pound company, you know, my role, I have one specific rules on that board. I don't have to look at everything because my other colleagues are with me. And usually you'll have more than one non-exec. Whereas if I work with a small company, I might be the only person there as chair.
So small you're doing everything. Large, surely you have unlimited bandwidth and unlimited money to go and spend. So that must be the easiest, surely.
No, the problems are just bigger.
Different problems.
The cash challenges might be bigger. So, you know, the problems are different. But I think what is similar is that there is, because I tend to do difficult or about to become difficult situation, unfortunately, usually there's a degree of complacency that has come across the company. And that's where, you know, you started your introduction about, you know, the importance of the people in making the right decision. I absolutely have observed that in all of my career, you know, and of course we make mistakes. We don't always make the right decision, but on the whole, it is the people that create the situation that, you know, we then have to, that we have to deal with.
In my
so affordability is a factor for sure.
In my experience, I find the small businesses are easier because it's usually pretty obvious. It's usually a one-man, one-woman band. The big businesses are hard, but the worst ones are the in-betweens because there's not enough money and they've still got lots and lots of issues. So therefore, Masoud, I'd like to talk about family businesses. Now, you've dealt with obviously some small family businesses, but also we've discussed before where we're talking about international, multi-jurisdictional family businesses, which are absolutely just huge PLCs, but they're run by a very tight family and they've just grown over the years. What can you give some examples of what you've seen and some practical war stories about where it's gone wrong and where it's gone right?
I've worked for 4 different family businesses, and you really need to understand the family dynamics. I mean, like I was giving the example of, 3 brothers, 4 brothers, 2 brothers and a sister, whatever. Those were all sort of, and all, of course, their children that you need to look at. And the sensitivity to not become seen as partisan on one side of the family against the other, for example, to bring the whole family together, that is extremely hard, because on the whole, one of them would have brought you in. and you'd be seen as the tool of that side of the family. And, you know, we've all got families. There are politics within each families, especially when there's a lot of money involved, it becomes even bigger, and the sensitivity to that becomes extremely important. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to bring the people on board with the changes that you want to make, and you will not be seen as an honest value creator, as opposed to, you know, just being mouthpiece for one or other parts of that. So that's the first part. Second thing is really understanding the motivation of each one of those individuals. Some people just want income. They're not interested in involvement. Other people, no, they want control. Somebody else wants their brand and the family name to be associated together. You know, actually, I've worked for a company where the company name was the family name, and the family name, therefore, is all they care about. I mean, I worked for a gentleman, all he cared about was his reputation. Bless him, he's dead now, but he, you know, you'd want to deliver that reputation for him. We got him £1 billion, and he shook my hand and said, "Is that it? What an anticlimax." His motivation was his name. Now, understanding all of those things and then making sure that you navigate that is extremely important. So cultural sensitivity is the key. But also generational change. So the difference between the first generation and the second generation, the founder is always different. Let me tell you, I find this the biggest risk. You mentioned Commodus and Marcus Aurelius. I have experienced that. I've experienced founders who were grown and learned with the growth of their business, who were authentic, who were responsible, who, like I said, all they wanted their reputation. And they tried to put that into their children, like we all do. So force their next generation to work in the field, force them to become directors of the company, force them. But you cannot but say that this child was born a billionaire. This child knows that their future isn't dependent necessarily on this or the other, and they're not going to be the same as the founder. And for example, in that same big business that I'm talking about, the moment that the founder passed away and the son took over, the company that had been making profit for 89 years crashed and went into loss and shrank, and got, you know, the value was destroyed. And that is where the non-exec board can support that kind of transition, can provide the right advice, can provide the right governance to ensure that the transition risks is managed. With the family businesses, transition risk is a major, major, major risk. It's probably the #1 risk. In every single situation that I've seen it, that has happened to be the Achilles heel of the business. And you can prepare for that in advance by at least mitigate it in a big way.
Excellent. So have you seen Succession, as in the TV drama, in real life?
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, you know, the coffee corner conversations where people are spitting poison at their cousins and their uncles or whatever else is normal. Unfortunately normal. And to bring people together to say, look at the bigger picture, look at the bigger win, look at the longer term success that this could be. Let go of the pettiness, let go of the you know, what you were felt that you had been slighted, or your family side had not, and you know, think of the bigger picture, think of the longer term, and you really influence people. There's a lot of coaching involved. And for that coaching to happen, you need to be trusted. And for that trust to happen, you need to have proven yourself that you're not there just to be another political tool, and that you're not political. I mean, you need to be the wise owl who sees everything but doesn't play.
So, Beatrice, are you the wise owl that sees everything and doesn't play? Or do you get stuck in?
It's only her glasses. It's not her.
I certainly try to be a wise owl, for sure. And I was reflecting on what Masoud was just saying. There's no doubt that the family businesses, I do believe, are the most difficult ones because of the personalities, the culture, and the fact that life and business is really one. And usually the level of expertise experience is different because you've kind of been homegrown. And indeed, as chair, the biggest thing I've had to do in the whole of my career has been when I had to say to a founder that he was not the right CEO for his business and he should step down. That was probably the toughest discussion.
So how did that go?
Well, it took a year. And I don't think I am this founder's best friend.
Yeah,
it's tough. It's very tough. And that's when, you know, that independence is so important, where you have to see what's right for the company and then what's right for the individual. And sometimes the two are not the same thing. And in my experience, at some point, founders who have been the strongest assets of their businesses at some point become the actual biggest liabilities because the business has outgrown them. And, you know, founders usually want the control, want to keep everything, you know, done by themselves, and really resist employing talent to allow the business to grow and, you know, and learn from new thoughts. So that's a big issue. Yeah.
So we've discussed quite a lot here: business types, family types, business types. But effectively, the audience will want to know what works, because we've discussed the war stories, we've discussed the history, we've discussed academic, we've discussed practical. But therefore, we need to really say, what can we give them? What works? What works in your experience? So let's talk about external business focus first. Beatrice.
Well, and I know we have a lot of CEOs on the webinar today. I wish I knew now what, you know, when I was a CEO. And the first thing I'm going to say is, as a CEO, you must have the right chair, because the chair, with your help, will make the composition of the board overall. So the chair role is critical. And the CEO has a say in the appointment of the chair. So don't be forced, you know, don't be given a chair by your investor, you know, be part of the recruitment process and make sure you appoint someone that actually meets the needs that you have as a person and that your business has. Then together with your chair, build the right board. And my third piece of advice is it is your job as a CEO to get value from that board. If you're not getting value from that board, discuss it with your chair and agree a plan of action, which might mean you change some of your non-exec, you have less, you have more, whatever, but don't assume that this is a given and you have to work with it. And I do believe the role of the non-exec has changed enormously over the years. You know, if I think back, you know, maybe I'll say 10 years ago, you know, a lot of non-exec were it was kind of an end of career appointment. You know, you would just turn up for the board meeting, get your director fees, and that was the end of it. This is not life anymore. You know, for me, to be a non-exec is really a true profession, and you do need different skills. You do need to continue to learn. You do need to know how to challenge, how to influence, how to bring value in a non-executive capacity and help the company think of the future. I think we've said that a lot today. This is our main role. Look forward. Don't miss the big trend. Don't miss what's happening in the market. And very often, you know, you might say things and your CEO doesn't register, it doesn't work for him or for her at that point. But it is not unusual that a month or 6 months later, suddenly it comes back because it's been digested by the business. And then at that point is the right time for them. And then we move forward.
I've often worked with businesses where I've come in and you see the board working as a functioning board, and you look at certain non-exec directors and you think they're just there. It's like a parish council. And there are others who actually take a real passion and they're not afraid of challenging themselves, challenging the advisors, challenging the board. And they're on the same wage, the same 30, 50,000 pounds, whatever that someone else is. But they actually have a passion for the board and they're not going there just to see out their dotage. So to me, the refreshing of a board with non-exec directors is very important. Just because a non-exec's been there for 5 years, 8 years, doesn't mean that person still deserves to be there. So the CEO should have the power and the aptitude to say that a non-exec board is no longer helping me in the way I want. And if effectively the payment to pay the non-execs was coming out of the CEO's personal pocket, I think the CEO would actually say, I want value for money. How does a CEO get value for money? How do they
Well,
drive the NEDs, Masoud?
yeah, but look, at the end of the day, you need to understand your needs. And that is the critical thing, your future needs, exactly as you said, and say, how do I get the support? How do I get the talent? How do I get the expertise? Just as an example, say your strategy said that you need to move into new markets. Do I have some people who understand those markets? Do I understand people who understand the new product range that I want to have? Do I understand the new transformation, AI, technology that I need to put in place? Do I have, and that's basic technical capability before you even get into the cultural side of things. And some of the people here on the call are ex-Vodafone. I remember, for example, how Ian McLaurin, Lord McLaurin, was working with Chris Gent, and how that was significantly different whilst the growth was happening in Vodafone versus post-growth, where the board became much more political, all the rest of it. And you need to understand the needs of the situation and the future. You said that, Andrew, and I couldn't agree with you more. Then the key element for me is having the right people is always the key factor that makes the difference. The people who, as Beatrice says, look into the future and can see the risk coming. People who have the capability to deal with things that are even unforeseen. COVID showed us this. COVID showed us that even if it wasn't in your risk register, you hadn't seen it, businesses that were able to leverage capability, that had the culture of working together to create continuity, and what makes a difference in the future unpredictable change that is coming. So do you have the right people who work together in a team in the right culture that allows you to leverage their value based on things that you haven't even planned for yet? And that is going to be more and more of the future, based on the rate of change, the unpredictability of the change, the impact of small things that are going to have on the businesses. Do you have the right people that you can trust, who can act as a team together? Not say, okay, this isn't my job, it's your problem. No. As a team, are we going to make this a success? And I think also this is where it's different between the big companies and the small companies. Because going back to the question you asked, Beatrice, the big companies have the money, have the ability to buy in talent and whatever else, but they don't know how to leverage it efficiently, and they are too static and change resistant. The smaller to medium-sized businesses, especially medium-sized businesses, have the big company needs, but don't have the money for it yet. So where the NED can be a very good value, give you big company capability, but without breaking the bank, and with the flexibility.
Masoud, where do I find one of these? Do I go down the golf club, or do I the pub? How do I find these brilliant NEDs who are cost effective?
Look, Beatrice mentioned this in one of our previous meetings with you and I. Actually, I think this is something that Beatrice is passionate about. But I will say that selecting the right person is absolutely key. We mentioned the family businesses and the fact that you normally put family members on the board just from a trust and point of view, or you put ex-executives on board, or you put the people with the right names. I'm sorry to say this, I hope it doesn't affect anyone, but rent-a-lord kind of thing. That is not the future. Beatrice has already said that. I couldn't endorse that enough. You have to have a proper selection process, proper process for ensuring that they continue to add value. That's also your point, Andrew. Is this person still valid for this our future? Is it still something that will bring success as we define it going forward into the future?
So Beatrice, clearly lots of NEDs love to collect board titles, but I guess sometimes if you're a very moral NED, you might not want to be the NED because you feel you cannot help them. So I know that you chatted about a very large business with me a while back where you're sort of knocking on the door trying to help, but in the end you just couldn't work out how to assist them. Without naming any names, do you want to talk us through that, or some other deals where effectively you've said no, even if you do pay me my X £1,000, I just don't think I'm the right person, or I don't think you'll accept my advice, so therefore why would I want to put myself through this? Because you're basically not listening to me as an NED. You don't want a balanced board. You want to collect names, but at the end of the day, you don't want it to deliver a balanced outcome.
Yes, and I think, that's why as an NED, you have to have your own values and standards, I'm going to suggest. Because as I said earlier, I do believe it's a profession and you have to see it as a, proper career. And in my 8 years in a non-negative space, on 3 occasions, I actually resigned from the board because I felt it was just not right. Either my advice, had noticed I was not making any headways and I was very concerned about the future, but could not find a way. So I don't resign straight away. I mean, the example you were touching on, I think I left after 18 months in the business, but it came to that point and said, look, it's so obvious what's going to happen, but my board just did not want to see it. My board didn't want to change the direction. And I said, well, I don't want to be part of that. I could see that fall coming, a year, 2 years down the line. So I resigned. And as I said, it happened in 2 other occasions where you feel that you're not getting through. Clearly, you're the wrong person to do that job. So vacate the role to allow the company then to recruit someone else that might have more success.
Masoud, we talked about psychology of boards. We've only got a few more minutes, so I've been receiving questions, so I've been interjecting the questions into this. So therefore, we probably won't stop for a question and answer at the end. Just run through. But under promising, over delivering, issues around that. As from an academic point of view, I guess there's lots of studies about this. What's the best way for an NED to work?
Well, the reality is you need to have a more holistic approach. You have some technical capability, you have some managerial leadership capability, you also have to have the right governance, you also have to have the right processes, all of those things in place. All of these things sing in cohesion together to create value. And the academic studies all show this, that organizations that have the future capability ready ahead of the curve make the success more sure at lower cost and at lower risk. The more you wait for the challenge to hit you, the more it'll cost you, the higher risk you'll have, and the more you'll lose the early advantage of success. So I often I'm surprised about this because Beatrice mentioned this. I remember when we were doing the new strategy for a failing telecom business that lost $3 billion in 2 years. I brought in some futurists before we did the board discussion of strategy, just to inject some information into what's happening, what's coming. And it's surprising you how much is available to feel externally understand what your needs are. And what your needs are likely to be. Okay, there will always be things that you can't prepare for. We said that about COVID, but there's a lot that could be prepared for if the boards were more focused on future and on external rather than internal issues. And I think that's where the NED really brings value. Beatrice already mentioned that, and I want to reaffirm that. It is important because, listen, we've all been operational directors. They're not going to raise their heads as much as we'd like from day to day because that urgent stuff demands attention. The NED can help that.
Good. So if I was an older operational director thinking about becoming an NED, what's one positive and one negative, what you found in your careers as an NED? Because you both come from the operations, you're still active people, but what if you're going to give some learnings, you're going to say, oh my God, don't do that, for God's sake, it's the worst possible thing. What's a very positive and what's a very negative thing about what you found working as an NED, Beatrice?
I think the most challenging thing is that although you are going to be part of different boards and different teams, bottom line, you're on your own. And therefore, all the effort that is required to maintain your network, maintain your knowledge, update your knowledge, gate training, it takes a lot of discipline to force yourself to remain up to date and therefore valuable to those boards. So I think that's the most challenging thing. I think another one, certainly for me, who was kind of, action woman, to realize that you are a non-exec and to accept that your CEO and the SLT might want to go down a route which is not the route you would have chosen had you been a CEO. But you know what? You're not the CEO. And you have then to support the executive team in whatever direction they have chosen, even though you might not agree with it. So these are probably the most difficult things for me. Yeah. What I love actually is that I can now sleep at night, every night, because I am not attached to the results the way I was. I am not conditioned to look at my sales every hour or every half a day as I used to. You have a different distance, a different perspective on the business, and you get moved by bigger topic, bigger issues, you know, that move to the future rather than that day to day that creates a lot of stress. So that's the best bit, no stress.
I guess the first 6 months of you becoming no longer operational but working as an NED, it must have been extremely difficult not to wade in and go, oh, I must do this, I must do that, and no, this is how you do it. To actually fight back the desire to be the CEO when you're absolutely the NED must have been very difficult for the first 6 months.
Well, or even longer, I have to say, because, you know, there's always...
You're still fighting.
You know, that passion that is there. But I think I was fortunate by not having good boards as a CEO for so long that, you know, I always go back to what it is I would have liked when I was a CEO, what I did like. And I really generally try really hard to be, I think, the NED that I would have wanted to have when I was a CEO. That is really my compass. You know, that's what kind of, you know, keeps me sane.
Masoud, what about you? Positives and negatives?
Well, the negative is absolutely right. I mean, look, if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said exactly the same. I could have, you know, you think, oh my God, I should do this myself. I could do this better. You know, there's some basic mistakes that are happening, but things have changed for me. And being the trusted coach, putting some facts and challenges on the table and letting the executives come to you. Create the pull rather than the push. Don't push yourself forward and say, oh, by the way, I mean, look, you have a duty, if you like, to call things out. No doubt about it. But letting the executives be executives, and then for them to trust you, to know that you're there to help them be successful, and to let them come to you and ask for your advice rather than you push it. So that's the main thing that you know, is my learning from what's going on. But the other thing is humility. You go in there with all kinds of assumptions, and you have to continuously check yourself and check those assumptions. And that's also what I've learned. And some of the colleagues that might remember from, you know, moving from Netherlands to Turkey, from one turnaround to another turnaround, you know, things that worked in Netherlands didn't work in Turkey. I mean, that's an international experience. In UK, you know, things that work in Vodafone didn't work in BT. You know, you gotta think through and challenge yourself all the time and stay humble and learn, continuously learn. And adding value early, finding a couple of things that are just there because you've been and explored the business, and you know, show value early, build that trust, and create the pool.
Perfect. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I'd quickly like to just draw things together and summarize. To me, a balanced board is like an investment. If you've spent X million pounds on buying an asset, buying a subsidiary, buying a thing, why not spend X 100,000 buying your board? And therefore the board has to perform. It has to have a return on investment. It has to have performance. It has to have KPIs. If your board is sat around like a parish council, it's not a performing asset. So I would say a board is just as valuable as an asset, as a revenue producer, as a cost, as an income, a profit, and as a physical asset. So to me, the idea that a board is not an asset is an anathema. A board is an asset, and everyone must get to understand that. And therefore, for an asset to work efficiently, it's got to be worked efficiently, driven, understood, updated, refreshed. So everything you do with a normal asset, I think, could happen to the board more or less. And I think sometimes we don't think about it that way. Second, I think we need real quality. The idea that you go down the golf club and you get your former banker who's been with your business 30 years, retires and works with you. Clearly, sometimes that's excellent, but often it's not, because it's old history. It's not about challenge. The person who's basically the great and the good, rent-a-lord, as you said, Masoud, can work in certain environments, but ultimately an NED must be active. They must, in one sense, work themselves out of a job. If they believe they're no longer adding value, then your best NED will tap you as a CEO on the shoulder and say, I'm not sure I'm adding the value I once did, or perhaps you need to talk to John or Frank or Libby, because ultimately I think they're better to assist us. So therefore, NEDs working their way to redundancy is actually quite an unusual thing, but quite a smart thing. Yeah. I think also you need to create external advice. So therefore, if you buy a lawyer or buy an accountant's advice, it's X hundred, X £1,000 an hour. If you choose the right NED, you can have that all for the X £1,000 per year. It's on tap. It may not be there every day, but people will get back to you. So choosing NEDs with an absolute deep understanding of your business, whether it's the IP side, the IT side, whether it's human resources, whether it's growing the business into an international, try and find an NED which actually attaches to things that you know you want or that you think you will want in the next coming years, because those guys are absolutely invaluable. And then ultimately, the old-fashioned point, governance. NEDs should actually persist on remuneration, the audit committee, etc., etc. But I've seen so many businesses where without governance, disproportionate decisions are made just because someone shouts more than someone else. And therefore, having a strong NED that says, now, we want everyone to have their moment. But ultimately, just because someone is a much more persuasive character doesn't mean that their data, doesn't mean that their thought process is any better than anyone else's. And so I think sometimes having an NED that basically allows the board to work in harmony and allows everyone to have the right to speak. So a softly spoken IT person actually is God's gift to the business. But if that person's shouted down, you're in trouble. So that, to me, having better governance is a key point. So those four things for me, plus all the war stories we've heard, I think should allow our audience members to go home, back to work today and thinking, 3 or 4 things. What did I learn? What can I take forward? What can I say at the next board meeting when I'm the advisor or when I'm a board member and say, I've got this sparky idea. Now, clearly, we'd love you to say I was on a course with Beatrice, Masoud and Andrew, but I know you probably won't. But hopefully just remember, when there's that moral position, you'll say to yourselves, it was a learning that we had with Resolve at 9 a.m. on the 15th of April. So thank you, Masoud. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for all our clients and people who've turned up for the event. What we'll do is we'll record, date stamp this webinar. So therefore we'll then put it out in bite-sized chunks. So therefore you can review parts, because there was a lot to digest in this meeting and we can unpack it into key sections. So the next 2 days, we'll be sending it out through email, sending it out through LinkedIn. So members of the audience can actually look at this and go, right, I want to go to that point where Beatrice was talking about X or where Masoud was talking about Y. Because at the end of the day, this 1-hour presentation was all about helping you, our audience, do better. And if we can help in that way, I think Beatrice, Masoud and myself will see that as a great success. Absolutely. So thank you very much, Beatrice. Thank you very much, Masoud.
Pleasure.
And thank you very much, team and webinar. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.